Hey guys, thanks for checking out Quick Sessions Podcast. My name's Garrett Terrio, coming to you from inside Timberline Fitness Studio in Houston, Texas. And today's not so much a research article type of deal, but more of a opinion and a little insight on a popular method a lot of people use in the weight room. And that's the 5x5 method. Now, if you're not familiar, this is by no means any in-depth fitness guru type thing. All it is 5 repetitions for 5 sets. I bring it up because if you've ever played football or participated in any kind of powerlifting or any sport really, a lot of times your strength coach will have you do sets of 5x5. It's a benchmark, and it is a benchmark for a reason. A lot of people do this because if let's say your max is 300, right? 5x5 is something that you should be able to do around 90% of your max at. So, you know, how much weight is that? So if your max is 300 pounds, you're looking at about 270, 275 for the 5x5 sets. Now, what this does such a good job of, because you don't max out every day you go in the weight room. Hell, you hardly ever max out ever. And as an adult, you may never do it. But what the 5x5 does is really combine strength and explosion and effort. And by effort, I mean intensity. And it really is the true power mecca as far as sets go, right? I mean, plenty of people do 3 sets of 10, right? 4 sets of 6. There's these certain set and rep combinations that we just accept as the norm in weightlifting. And I don't mean professional weightlifting. I mean just the guy going from the office to the gym. Could be anybody. 3 sets of 10 might be the most common thing there is. Maybe 3 sets of 12. But most people default to those numbers. But once you get heavier, the roadmap gets a little crazy, right? But what us in the fitness community or anybody that's looked at weights has found is the 5x5 is it's a good medium of getting enough reps in, right? 3 sets of 10 is 30, right? 5 sets of 5 is 25. So you're still getting a good amount of reps in as far as like the bench press goes. And that's mostly what I'll be talking about. Squatting can be a little different, but it's still essentially the 5x5 is a good metric, even though it's not used as much. Deadlifts, not so much. Sets of 3 are probably a little more useful as far as achieving maximum intensity. And that's essentially what this podcast is about, is achieving maximal intensity, your own relative intensity, and then really making sure you get the true work of the workout of the 5x5 in each set. So what does that all mean? Well, relative intensity is how much you can do relative to your own max, right? So I say the 5x5 is at 90%, so maybe you can only do 85% 5x5. If that's your max, as far as that set is concerned, because we all have 1 rep maxes, we all have 10 rep maxes of certain weights when you're fresh, and you can figure out that number for just about any lift in any rep range. Now, as far as actual intensity goes, and I know intensity sounds like a mental thing, and I'm kind of putting it as this quantitative, almost external force in your weightlifting. It can be used both ways, but for the sake of this podcast, I'm putting it in as almost a unit of measurement for the 5x5 lift. So then you're trying to level up with actual intensity. You're trying to make sure your intensity levels at this range are there. And what that means is, so, relatively intense stuff is, let's say you can only do 85% 5x5. Okay, there it is. But you want to get to a point where it's 90%. 89% technically is the actual number, but we all just round up to 90% unless it works out in your favor and it's convenient. So you get to the point where, okay, you're going to do 5 sets of 5, and let's just pretend and say 275. Now here's the kicker. When someone says do 90% of your max, the idea is that you're supposed to be able to max out at 5 reps. Now, like anything else, you can't do your max multiple times in a short period of time. Fatigue sets in. So then the question becomes, okay, let's say you have 275 on the bar and you get 5 reps. Well, here comes set 2. Are you still able to get 5 reps at that same weight? Maybe, but odds are it's going to feel a little heavier than 275 because now that the fatigue factor, let's just go with that, has kicked in. Now 275 feels a little heavier than 275. How much heavier? Could be a pound, could be 2, could be 3. It gets exponentially worse each time because your body doesn't know exactly what weight you are bearing, right? It feels a weight, it adapts, and you push the weight. Now, each time you contract, energy is being broken down to move that weight. Well, the next rep, you're not having nearly as much, right? Whereas the 1 rep max is how much you can do 1 rep, and then your body doesn't have the energy to do another rep. This is going for 5. So it's a descending line if you will, each rep, the weight will feel heavier as far as your muscles are concerned, right? Mentally, it may not feel heavier, but as far as your muscles are concerned, they have X amount of energy, X amount of muscle fibers recruited to lift this weight. Then they're broken down, they're tired, they're contracted. Then they got to regroup and do it again, except this time, every rep you do, it feels a little heavier. That's why you fail out at 5 reps or 6 reps or whatever it may be until you get to the very end. So here's the idea. Let's say you get to the end of your 5x5, set 4 and 5, and you can't get the reps, right? Because your body is exhausted. It's done this countless times. You can't do a 5-rep max for 5 sets. So the idea is, how do you adjust so that your intensity stays at 100%? Because full power generation at 100% intensity is the most efficient way to get stronger. And I'm going to get to that in another podcast based on the velocity testing that I've been doing in the gym. But what do you do? Well, there's a couple things you can do. Number one is the drop set. We've all done it, where you crank out the reps, and when you fail, you can strip off a 5 or something, maybe a 10. Who knows what it is? That's number one. The downside is it can be a big break in your set, so too much recovery may happen. So you could lose that effect. Now, if you have 2 people with you, no problem. You can rack it real quick. They can take it off. You can just hold it at the top and they can take it off. But as far as the solo lifter, which most people are, that's not always the best. Now, the second idea is you can just lower the weight in general. Say, I wish I had a percentage to put on it. Let's just call it 10 pounds. Well, maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not enough, right? Now we're playing a guessing game that we really don't want to be involved in. We want to know, 5x5, here's our max. In order to keep going, how much do I need to take off? And unfortunately, we're not hooked up to any machines that tell us what level of fatigue we're at, how much we're going to recover in the resting between taking weight off, and the actual number of weight we need to keep doing to get maximal intensity, right? So there's a problem there. The third solution, which I don't hate, I think it defeats the purpose of the 5x5 a little bit, is you can just count the reps you didn't get and just do an extra set at the end. Now, what this does is ensure that you get all your reps at that weight. But the reason I'm not high on it is because, like I said, your body doesn't have a number of what it's lifting. It's just feeling the exhaustion. So as far as the conclusion of it, what I think would be best is just lighten up the weight. If it's too light, put some more reps in. Because the idea is that you're maxing out. You're going to failure. Something you shouldn't do every time, per se, but you can do it a lot. And it is the best way to grow in strength and mass. Now, the low reps are mostly geared towards strength, but, you'll put a little bit of mass on with it too. So to really sum it up, okay, all this rambling, I guess I didn't do a great job of explaining what I'm looking to achieve by putting this information out on a podcast. But when I see people try to go low rep, it's overdone a ton, right? They'll do a set of 5, then they'll do a set of 3. Then they might get 2, and that's the workout. And it's a very inefficient way of trying to build up your strength, your max strength. And in turn, when you're doing less reps, your intensity is going down. And the more efficient way, the more powerful way to do it is to choose one of the 3 options I laid out earlier, or just slightly drop the weight. So what I would like, for instance, is let's say 5x5, 5 reps of 275 is your max. Do it. Second set, give it a shot. If you can't get 5, let's drop it to 270 or even 265. Then go for it. And you know what? If you got to get 6 reps in, get 1 more rep in. But if you're failing out on 275, there's no way you're doing that many of 265. Your muscles just don't recover quick enough from that kind of load. And yes, what this means is I do value intensity level, number 1, but also power generation. It's very rare that someone's highest power generation is at their max, right? They have people, where maybe 4 reps is their max power generation on a per rep basis. Some people are all the way at 10. Normally it doesn't get much more above that. To that point, it's too light and all you're doing is going as fast as you can. Not a lot of muscle contraction really getting recruited. Not a lot of muscle being recruited for the contraction, I should say. So, moral of the story, if you're doing your power reps, which we're going with 5x5, if it's 4x6, that's fine too. 5x5 is kind of the mantle. It's always been, if you can do 275 on your 5x5, on the bench, you get respect in any gym you walk in, right? So, if you're giving it a shot, say you can get 5, but if that burns you out, don't keep going at it. Don't do a set of 3 and 2, and then next thing you know, your whole bench day was only 10 reps. You're just never going to get enough stimulated growth out of your muscles, and your intensity will have been so low, it's going to be hard to get a lot of good anabolic effects from that workout. Guys, thanks for checking it out. It was kind of a ramble, one of those noteless podcasts, but if you're into getting stronger, if you're into the 5x5 reps and sets, maybe you learned a little something, maybe you thought about it a little different way now that I laid it out the way I did. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Catch you next time.